All right, so get ready because we're about to take a deep dive into a world where kings and queens, they battle for supremacy, but not on a battlefield, no, on a chessboard. We're going to be exploring the fascinating story of chess in the USSR, where this game got really entangled with politics, with ideology, even with national identity. And we've got some amazing sources to help guide us: historical accounts, chess studies, even personal memoirs from the players themselves.
It's a story that often surprises people. When we think about chess, we often picture this quiet intellectual pursuit, kind of detached from the world. But in the Soviet Union, chess, well, it was anything but quiet or detached. It was a tool, almost like a weapon, a mirror
Yeah.
reflecting the ambitions and anxieties of a whole nation.
So before we get into the Soviet era, I'm really curious about the roots of chess in Russia. What was the chess scene like before the revolution? Was it already popular?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was really deeply embedded in Russian culture long before the Soviets ever came along. It was a popular pastime, across all the social classes. I mean, we're talking roots going back centuries to the time of Kievan Rus's. There are even accounts of Tsar Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, being a chess enthusiast himself. He even provided financial support for major tournaments, so you can really see how much chess was valued, even at the highest levels of society.
A chess-loving czar. Wow, that's not something you hear every day. So it sounds like chess wasn't just for, intellectuals. It had this broad appeal across Russian society.
That's right. And it wasn't just a casual, pastime either. You could already see signs of Russia's chess prowess,
Yeah.
emerging on the world stage.
Mhm.
For example, take the 1914 St. Petersburg tournament. That was a major international event, attracted some of the best players of the time.
That tournament happened right before World War I, right?
Yes, it did. Yeah. And it's a strange twist of fate, but the war actually interrupted the tournament. Some of the Russian players, well, they ended up being interned in Germany just because they were Russian citizens in, enemy territory. Can you imagine that? Becoming a prisoner of war, all because of a chess tournament.
Wow, that's unbelievable. It really shows you how, world events can impact even these seemingly peaceful things like chess. But of course, the biggest upheaval came with the 1917 revolution. I imagine that changed just about everything for chess in Russia.
You guessed it. The Bolsheviks, after they seized power, well, they saw chess not just as a game. They saw it as a tool for social engineering.
Yeah.
They actually believed that they could use chess to shape the minds of the masses, to cultivate things like strategic thinking, discipline, these things they considered really essential for building a socialist state.
So chess went from being something czars enjoyed to a tool for building a whole new society. It's fascinating. But how did they actually put that into practice? Was everyone on board with this political chess?
Well, not exactly. I mean, you got to remember that even back then, chess had, it had its purists, people who believed that it should just stay a pure intellectual pursuit, no political agendas. So there's a real clash between that view and the Bolsheviks' vision of a game that served the interests of the state.
Oh, I bet that sounds like a recipe for some serious debates over the chessboard.
There were definitely some heated discussions, disagreements, but in the end, while the Bolsheviks' vision won out, a key figure in this whole transformation was Alexander Ilin. Now, he was a fascinating guy, a Bolshevik revolutionary and a chess master. We talk about bridging two worlds. He really truly believed in the power of chess to shape individuals and shape society as a whole.
Yeah, it sounds like he was the perfect person to kind of bridge those two worlds, right?
Exactly. He became a very, very vocal advocate for what he called political chess. He argued, that chess, that the game, it could be used to develop skills, valuable skills that would be used in this new socialist society they were building. And this vision was actually officially adopted. It happened at the 1924 All-Union Chess Congress, where the state took control of the game's organization, I mean, formally. So from that point on, chess in the USSR, it wasn't just a game anymore. It was an instrument of the state.
Okay, so the stage was set for this whole new era of chess in Russia, one where the game was, it was completely intertwined with the ideology and the ambitions of the Soviet state.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing they didn't shy away from showcasing this new chess powerhouse to the rest of the world, right?
Oh, absolutely not. In
Yeah.
fact, they saw this as a prime opportunity, a chance to demonstrate the superiority of their Soviet system to everyone. Nikolai Krylenko, a pretty prominent Bolshevik, he was put in charge of the Soviet chess organization, and he was a true believer. believed in using chess as a form of propaganda to show the world that the Soviet Union was producing the best and brightest minds, you know.
So they weren't content with just being, good at chess. They wanted to make a real statement with it.
Exactly. They saw these international chess tournaments as well as a battlefield of ideas, a chance to show off the intellectual, prowess of the Soviet Union, and they had a grand stage in mind for their debut,
Yeah.
the 1925 Moscow International Tournament.
Now that sounds like a big deal. Tell me more about that. What made it so special?
Well, for starters, it was the first ever state-sponsored international chess tournament. Think about that. An entire nation, they put all their resources and weight behind a chess tournament.
Yeah.
And it was a star-studded event, too, attracted top players from all over the world.
It sounds like they were pulling out all the stops to make a statement to the world.
Oh, yeah, they definitely were. And the tournament, well, it was a huge success. It really captured the public's imagination, It generated what they called chess fever across the nation. It was amazing. You had people from all walks of life, factory workers, Red Army soldiers. Everyone was caught up in this excitement. The Soviets had managed to turn chess into this national obsession, a symbol of their intellectual and cultural, might.
That's incredible. Who would have thought that chess could become such a powerful tool for promoting a nation's image and ideology? It sounds like the Soviets were masterful at using chess to their advantage.
They were. But this success, it didn't come without a price.
Yeah.
The intense focus on winning, on, showcasing Soviet superiority, it created a lot of pressure for these players. Can you imagine having the weight of an entire nation's expectations on your shoulders every time you sat down at the chessboard?
That sounds so daunting. What would happen to players who couldn't handle the pressure? Or even worse, the ones who, I don't know, maybe dared to question how chess was being used?
Well, that's where we start to see the darker side of Soviet chess, I guess you could say. The pressure to perform it was immense, and the consequences for not meeting expectations, they could be severe. You had cases of political interference, players being punished for not following the party line, and there was the very real danger of falling out of favor with the authorities.
So it's starting to sound less like a game and more like a high-stakes political match with real-world consequences for these players.
You could say that. And as the stakes got higher and higher, some players just couldn't take the pressure anymore. We start to see these high-profile defections. Chess masters who, they wanted greater freedom, more opportunities. They went to the West. Players like Alexander Alekhine and Efim Bogolyubov, they're really good examples of this. They were willing to risk everything to escape that suffocating control, I guess you could say, of the Soviet chess system.
So even in the world of chess, the Cold War was playing out. These players, they almost became pawns in this larger ideological struggle.
Yeah, exactly. And then you had the chilling reality of Stalin's Great Terror,
Yeah.
It cast a long shadow over the chess world as well. Even chess players, even organizers, they weren't immune to the purges and the persecution that was sweeping the nation. Some faced imprisonment, exile, even execution, victims of a regime that saw enemies everywhere. Even on the chessboard.
That's chilling. Even something as seemingly innocent as chess couldn't escape the brutality of that regime. It's a stark contrast to that image we have of chess as this purely intellectual thing.
It is. It really is. But even with all that darkness, there are also these stories of incredible resilience. During World War II, when the Soviet Union was facing, its darkest days, chess, it continued to thrive. They even held tournaments in besieged Leningrad. Even in military hospitals, it gave people a sense of normalcy. It was a distraction from the horrors that were going on and a little glimmer of hope in the middle of all the chaos.
It's amazing to think about, chess providing such solace and strength during a time of such hardship. It really shows you the power of this game to get people through even the most difficult of times.
It does. And the Soviet authorities, they were pretty quick to use this resilience, use it for their own propaganda. They showcased those wartime chess events as proof of the Soviet people's fighting spirit, their ability to just keep going, even in the face of, unimaginable adversity.
So chess was both this, a source of comfort for people and a powerful symbol of national strength for the Soviet state.
That's exactly right. It was this really complex, multifaceted thing, just like the Soviet experience itself.
And it's clear that we've only just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to this story. The rise of the Soviet school of chess, their domination of the world stage, the lives of all these individual players who navigated this complex and often challenging world.
You're absolutely right. There's so many fascinating layers to this story, and we'll explore those in more detail. And the next part of our deep dive, we'll look at how the Soviet Union became a real chess powerhouse, dominating the world stage for decades and leaving this lasting legacy, a legacy on the game itself.
So we ended talking about, chess becoming this big symbol in the Soviet Union, but I want to know more about how they actually became such a force, a dominant force in the chess world. I mean, was it just the pressure to win, or was there something else going on, something more strategic maybe?
Well, the pressure was definitely there. I mean, just imagine representing your country, on the world stage at these international tournaments and knowing that your performance, well, it didn't just reflect on you, it reflected on the entire Soviet system. But there was more to it than that. The Soviets, they had a deliberate, a systematic approach to chess, an approach that really set them apart. And it became known as the Soviet school of chess.
Okay, so break it down for me. What made this Soviet school, what made it so special? What made them so tough to beat?
Well, you can't talk about the Soviet school without talking about Mikhail Botvinnik.
Right.
He's often considered the patriarch of Soviet chess.
Yeah.
Botvinnik, he wasn't just a great player, he was a thinker. He
Yeah.
brought this scientific approach to chess, to the training and the strategy.
Mm.
He really believed in meticulous analysis, in really understanding the principles, the underlying principles of the game, rather than just, relying on intuition or talent.
So it was about being more analytical, I guess. Like they were like they were turning chess into a science.
Exactly, exactly. Botvinnik and other Soviet chess thinkers, they really elevated the game. Took it from an art form to a science.
Yeah.
They would dissect these games, develop new theories, and they created structured training programs for their young players. Really rigorous programs that were way more intense than anything they had in the West at the time. It wasn't just about playing chess. It was about studying it, understanding how it worked, and developing this systematic approach to becoming a master, I guess.
Yeah, I can see how that would give them a big edge. But what about their actual style of play? Was there something distinct about how Soviet players approached the game?
Oh, absolutely. The Soviet style, well, it was all about deep strategic planning, this relentless focus on long-term advantages. They were willing to make sacrifices, even big ones. Sometimes if it meant gaining a better position later in the game.
Yeah.
Patience was key. I mean, they were masters of the slow grind, slowly squeezing their opponents and then, exploiting any little weakness they could find.
It's almost like they were playing a different game altogether, not the flashy, attacking style you might see from other players. It was something much more, something much more calculated, maybe even methodical.
That's a great way to put it, actually. They weren't afraid to let go of material early on, if it meant getting a strategic advantage later. And that style, well, it took a lot of discipline, a lot of calculation. It wasn't about the quick knockout. It was about outmaneuvering your opponent, outthinking them over the whole course of the game.
It's interesting how it all ties back to their ideology, to that Soviet idea of chess as a tool for building a socialist state. I mean, their approach to the game, all that emphasis on collective effort, strategic planning, long-term goals, well, it kind of mirrors how they approached everything, right? I mean, from economics to international relations.
It is. It's a really interesting connection, isn't it? And it shows just how deeply ingrained, how deeply chess was in the Soviet mindset. It wasn't just a game to them. It was this reflection of how they saw the world, their belief in planning and discipline as the keys to achieving victory.
And of course, you can't talk about Soviet chess without talking about the Cold War. How did that rivalry, how did that play out, on the chessboard? Did chess become this kind of proxy war between the superpowers?
Oh, absolutely. Those matches, especially the top level ones, they took on this huge symbolic significance that went way beyond just the game itself. It became a battle of ideologies, a way for the Soviet Union and the West to kind of test their test their intellectual strength against each other, I guess. Every victory, every loss, I mean, it was scrutinized, analyzed for what it meant in the, in the bigger picture.
So each game was like a little Cold War of its own, this battle for supremacy between these two competing systems.
Hmm.
And the Soviets, I mean, with their systematic approach and their amazing players, were they just determined to prove that their system was better?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They really invested in their chess program. They nurtured talent, developed training methods, created this whole environment where chess was, I mean, it wasn't just a game, it was a national priority.
Yeah.
And they were really successful. The Soviet Union, they dominated the world chess stage for decades. They won countless championships, produced some of the greatest players of all time, names like Botvinnik, Tallow, Petrosian, Spassky, Karpov. They became synonymous with brilliance in chess.
It's amazing to think about how chess, this game that most people think of as a hobby, it became this arena for these global ideologies to clash. It just shows you the power of chess to capture people's imaginations and become something much bigger than itself.
It really does. And the intensity of the Cold War, I mean, it just added to all the drama and intrigue. But it's important to remember that even within this, seemingly invincible Soviet chess machine, there were some controversies, and challenges.
What kind of controversies are we talking about?
Well, one of the big issues that kept coming up was this accusation of what they called team tactics in these international competitions.
Mm-hmm.
There were allegations, that Soviet players would sometimes work together to make sure that their chosen champion, whoever that was, would win. Sometimes even sacrificing their own games to help a teammate.
Wait, hold on. So you're saying that they would throw games on purpose to rig the tournament?
Yeah, that was the allegation, and it was really controversial. There's still debate about how widespread these tactics actually were, but some really, some big name players and commentators, they accused the Soviets of basically cheating, of undermining, the fairness of the competition.
Yeah.
And that cast a bit of a shadow, over their achievements. It made people question whether their dominance was really legitimate.
I can see why people would be upset about that. It does kind of take away from the idea of it being a pure intellectual competition.
I understand that. I do. It reminds us that even in chess politics and national agendas can get in the way. But at the same time, you have to remember that even with these accusations, the Soviet players were still incredibly strong, on their own. You can't just dismiss their accomplishments altogether.
So it's a complicated legacy then, this blend of, this incredible talent and systematic training, but also these questionable tactics. It shows you that nothing's ever completely black and white. Not even in a game that's played on a checkered board.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's definitely something to keep in mind as we go further,
Okay, so we've talked about the system, the training, the international competition, all the controversies, but now I'm curious about the human side of things. What was it actually like to be a chess player in the USSR?
Well, it was a unique experience, full of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
On the one hand, chess players in the Soviet Union, they had a level of prestige and support that you just wouldn't find anywhere else. They were national heroes, almost like celebrities. They had access to the best coaches, the best training facilities. They were well compensated when they won.
Yeah. So it sounds like a pretty good gig if you were a talented chess player.
In a lot of ways, it really was. But there was another side to it too. The pressure to perform, to live up to what the state expected from you, to conform to the ideological demands of the regime. It was enormous. They weren't just playing for themselves. They were playing for the glory of the whole Soviet Union.
So it wasn't just about playing beautiful chess.
Yeah.
They had all this other stuff to think about. This constant pressure to represent the Soviet ideal.
Exactly. Chess players, they were expected to be model Soviet citizens, to embody the values of the system and to use their their platform to promote the Soviet agenda. That's a lot to carry, on top of the pressure of competing at the highest level.
I bet. That sounds, I mean, that sounds incredibly demanding. How did these players, I mean, how did they handle that kind of pressure?
Well, some of them thrived on it. They were driven by the challenge, the chance to represent their nation. But others struggled.
Yeah.
It was hard for them to cope with the constant scrutiny, the pressure to conform, the fear of failing, and like we talked about before, some of them just decided to defect. They wanted a life where they could play chess on their own terms, free from the constraints of the Soviet system.
So it wasn't all just glory and praise then. There was a real human cost to this pursuit of chess dominance.
There was. It's important to acknowledge that that side of the story, even within this system that produced so many amazing players, there were people who suffered it. It's a reminder that even in a game as, I don't know, as seemingly pure and intellectual as chess, there can be darkness, there can be complexity.
This whole deep dive it's been so eye-opening. I never realized how much chess and politics were tied together in the USSR, and how much the players themselves were caught up in this whole bigger struggle.
It's a fascinating story, isn't it? And,
Yeah.
and it raises a lot of interesting questions about the role of sports and ideology and national identity. Questions that are still relevant today, even though the Soviet Union, it's gone.
I totally agree. It's like this deep dive into chess history has given us this whole new way to look at some of the biggest issues that we're dealing with today. But before we wrap things up, there's one final question I'm curious to get your take on. So, knowing all this, all the pressure, the politics, the sacrifices that these players made, do you think Soviet chess was ultimately a good thing or a bad thing?
That's it's a tough question. One that historians are still arguing about today. There's no easy answer. On the one hand, you could say that the Soviet chess system, with its focus on rigorous training and making chess accessible to everyone, well, it did take the game to a whole new level. I mean, it produced some of the greatest players the world has ever seen, and it really popularized chess on a massive scale.
Yeah, so you have this amazing legacy of chess excellence that came out of the Soviet Union. But can we just ignore the bad stuff, the control, the pressure, the fact that people had to, they had to give up some of their freedom for all this success?
No, you're right. We can't ignore that. The system, it was definitely flawed. It was built on political control, and it often demanded that people conform.
Yeah.
Even if it meant stifling their individuality. And you look at the defections, the stories of those players they couldn't handle the pressure. They're stark reminders of the human cost of this whole relentless drive to dominate the chess world.
It's such a mixed bag, all this brilliance mixed with oppression. It seems like you can't really separate the achievements from the system that created them.
Yeah, I agree. It's a complicated legacy, one that's hard to categorize, and I think in the end it leaves us with more questions than answers. Was it worth it? Did the good outweigh the bad? These are questions that everyone has to wrestle with when they look back at the history of Soviet chess.
It's like we've stumbled into this whole hidden world, this little microcosm of the Soviet experience itself, with all its contradictions and complexities. But putting the politics aside for a minute, what about the impact on chess itself? Did the Soviet school, did it change the game forever?
Oh, absolutely. The way the Soviets approached chess, their emphasis on really understanding strategy and having this systematic approach to training, it had a huge impact, a lasting impact on the game. Even today, a lot of the principles and strategies that those Soviet players and theorists developed, well, they're still being studied and used by players all over the world.
Yeah.
They really revolutionized the way chess is played and taught.
That's really interesting to think about, how a system that doesn't even exist anymore can still have such a big influence on the game.
Yeah, it is, and I think it shows the power of ideas.
Yeah.
Even though the Soviet Union is gone, its legacy in chess, it lives on, not just in the history books, but in the way the game is played today.
This whole deep dive has been, it's been incredible. I had no idea how how connected chess and politics were in the USSR, or how much this game, this, seemingly simple game could tell us about an entire society.
It's a story that still fascinates me too. And what I find really, really interesting is that the themes we've been talking about, the role of sports, the balance between individual freedom and national goals, the way cultural achievements can be used for political purposes. I mean, these are all things that are still relevant today, even though the world is so different now.
Why, I couldn't agree more. It's like exploring chess history has given us this whole new perspective on some of the biggest issues that we're facing in the world today.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that history isn't just about about the past. It's about understanding the present and figuring out how to navigate the future.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to everyone listening, if you're as fascinated by this as we are, I encourage you to dig deeper into some of the stories, the players, the events that that really caught your attention. There's so much chess history out there to discover.
Who knows? Maybe you'll even have some aha moments of your own.
Well, until next time, everyone, keep those minds sharp. And remember, even in a game as old as chess, there are always new moves to be discovered.